Welcome to the checklist discussion on flooding, infrastructure, and engineering. We are joined by a very distinguished panel of experienced veterans to talk about this pressing issue and perennial issue that's plaguing our country. And not only do we want to talk about the same old complaints that we have all the time that we're all very well aware of, but to place this in a larger perspective of how this fits in to our stewardship of the country, future, the development of our future, the development of our civilization here in the Caribbean, in fact. So, and I couldn't ask for a better panel here. Let me introduce who I have with me. Let me start with Mr. Roger Ganesh. Roger Ganesh is the longest serving director of highways with the Ministry of Works. I think he was there for about 20 years in various capacities. Is that correct?
20 years as chief construction engineer and director of highways and other capacities, so 34 years total.
Right, and now he is totally in private practice.
Correct.
We also have Dr. Alan Sammy, who is the chairman of the Penal Debe Regional Corporation, and his background, and he's been in the politics and local government and dealing with these matters firsthand on the ground for decades. Dr. Sammy's background is in regional planning, initially focusing on the economic behavior of small farmers, and then later on he was with the Susu Land Project, which is very important. That I think a lot of people still don't know about. That was a very, very innovative project that's still around. That started in '84, and then he was a director and with the LSA on 2 separate occasions, dealing with squatter regularization and developing new sites. He was also in cricket administration for 44 years, including 8 years on the West Indies Cricket Board as a director. And we also have Dr. Ray Furlonge. He also a veteran. He's a traffic and transport engineer and project manager. Over 27 years experience as a traffic and transportation engineer, with 10 years in central government, 4 years in state-owned enterprises, and the rest in consulting practice with public and private sector entities. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
And there's a...
Sorry?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. But let's get into this. I mean, you all are, I have a lot of questions for you. You all have been dealing with this for decades, and people, sometimes just sit back and wonder, why are we facing these things over and over again? But let's start from the beginning with each of you. If you could just so our viewers, our listeners, our readers can get a sense of your involvement in this. Now, I'd like each of you to tell us a story of how you got, how you got involved in your career and your passion for the natural and built environment in particular. Let's start off with Dr. Sammy, and then Roger, and then Ray.
Okay, thank you, and I'm more than happy to be on this program and to be with those distinguished panelists. After I came back from Canada, obtaining my PhD, I soon became involved in Susu Land with John Humphrey, and I must confess he has been my inspiration, because whatever you learn in theory, he was doing it in practice. So all I did is applied whatever little knowledge I would have acquired formally in an academic environment to the
Can you
Susu
explain
land model.
Susu lands?
Yes,
Yeah.
Susu land is a not-for-profit company where the pooled resources of the people were used to buy estates, abandoned estates, and then subdivided after proper planning and then allocated back to the people. Susu means literally penny by penny. And indeed, people would contribute $5, $10, $15 over a period of time. And we had an agreement that when you reach a certain amount for that one lot of land, that you will then move on to the land and build. Now, it's important to understand the concept of incrementality, because people would go into a well laid out, a properly designed project, and then they would build, but they would have to understand it will be earthen drains, earthen roadways, and that over a period of time, working together as a community and also with the local government authorities, that you will have these facilities upgraded. And we have been able to have over 2,000 acres of land on 11 projects, including Tobago. And there are more than 2,000 or 3,000 people now living on these projects in varying stages of development, because some of them are still evolving. And meanwhile, of course, what you were
Basically,
doing is
it was like a creative way. We had a lot of people without land, and we had a lot of idle land. And so it was a way of figuring out of putting the two together, correct?
that is correct, yes. And that is what Humphrey and Sankar Singh and Asad Mohammed and Ivan Lachlan and a few of us were able to achieve.
Right. Good, good. And yeah, so you were going on about...
Well, and then of course I left. I used to be teaching, of course, at the time while I was in Susuland. I still am in Susuland after all these years. And then I became involved in politics. So I became deputy mayor in 1987 in San Fernando. I was a councillor elected. And then I migrated to the family land in Penal 30 odd years ago and became chairman of Penal Debe in 2003 and stayed for 7 years. And then when we won in 2010, I went back to the LSA and then stayed with Rudy Munilal in housing for a bit. And now since 2016, I'm back at the Penal Debe as chairman again.
Okay, very good, very good. So, Roger, let me ask you about, how you got involved in your career and your passion for the built and natural environment.
Okay, thanks again. I'm very proud to be on this program. In fact, I was telling you, I think this morning, I'm impressed with your work you have done so far. And I'm glad for the opportunity to voice out my concerns, because I do have concerns currently of what is taking place within our built environment in particular. But my passion for engineering and civil engineering in particular arose basically from where I grew up in Tunapuna, not a rural area, but close to on the foothills of the Northern Range, having access to St. Benedict and all the hiking trails and all that sort of thing. I developed an interest over the years in basically in improving infrastructure, not only roads and bridges, but also in development of the areas that basically I traversed in. A lot of my relatives came from the east, so I had opportunities to travel to the east, and always wondered why like towns like Arima and even Sani Grande died a slow death from the early 60s. And also wondered why no infrastructure was being done over those years. So my interest in infrastructure work basically and building the built environment arose. And obviously when I entered university at St. Augustine, I started engineering, and of course, practiced in specialized in civil engineering in particular. With my civil engineering practices, I've grew. Of course, Dr. Sammy of guys, Dr. Sammy in particular, as Mohammed, John Humphrey. I always followed their work closely. Alan could tell you about that. So my interest in basically they had a passion for developing infrastructure in this country and making life much more pleasurable and easier for people. So I did follow them, and of course, he'd been older than me. I look up to guys like them a lot. So my passion for highway engineering, traffic engineering, as Ray can endorse as well, has always been very interesting and very close to me. And I still have a deep interest in for the infrastructure development in this country, which I think needs very, very, very urgent attention, as we'll discuss further on. Basically, that's about it.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks. That's very interesting and a lot of overlap with Dr. Sammy. Dr. Furlonge, yourself, how, could you tell us about how you got involved?
Okay, sure. Thanks for this opportunity. I'm delighted to be able to share some of my ideas and learn as well from some of the ideas from others. When I left high school, all my colleagues were doing engineering, so I said I'll join in engineering, and I chose civil as the one that I was most, I can't say most interested, but least
uninterested,
opposed to. So I chose it. I never really enjoyed engineering at all, until I encountered in final year the area of transportation. And the reason for that, they had a social component. I was really fascinated by the social component of the transportation engineering.
And this was here at UWI?
Sorry, yes, at the University of Western.
And if you don't mind me asking, what years was that?
Yeah, I left in 84. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So my teacher was actually, and my mentor to this day was actually Dr. Carson Charles. He engineering a life to me. And I was good in mathematics, so I enjoyed the modeling using the social interaction and the various travel behavior and so on. And he made it come alive. I was really, really fascinated by the transportation engine because of Dr. Charles. And he and I have remained friends. I know he and Alan are also good friends as well. He was part of is part of the housing arrangement, the Susulan and so on. But it was when he went to the Ministry of Works and Transport, I used to be in construction. I started off my career in construction, working in private contractors and so on. And when he went into office, he transformed the Ministry of Works. He decided that they wouldn't have these unqualified technical people running the various districts all over the place. And he, for the first time, hired engineers. I was one of the last to get the call up from service commissions to go there. So it worked out nicely for me because all the guys went to work with Roger in Highways Division, and they asked me where I wanted to go. And I said I wanted to go to traffic management. And that is how I got there, because I was always fascinated about traffic management. And just in passing, traffic management is doing much with little to solve the problems. And that is what also fascinated me. So I went there, and the 10 years I spent and so on. And then, of course, because of my fascination again with this transportation, I went and did postgraduate studies. I went to the Indian Institute of Technology at the IIT in Roorkee. Those days it was called the University of Roorkee, and was on a scholarship. And I continued there. It was not studying for me. It was very easy for me, and I was able to do very well. And come back to. I decided to sink my bucket here back in Trinidad and contribute. It hasn't been easy all the time, and we'll talk about some of that here. But that's where I decided to make my contribution, right back here.
Great. Well, thanks for your background. I mean, it really helps us to situate yourselves in the situation, in this field and the problems that we face. Because I mean, and for each of you, you were inspired by persons who are mentors, who are visionaries in a way, who had a vision for what Trinidad and Tobago should be and how we could be in terms of our built environments and in relationship to the natural environment. So let me start off with the first question. First things first. I mean, is it really so impossible to stop the flooding devastation from rainfall that we see all the time? I mean, you have the excuse that the government says, and I have to say it's the PNM that do it all the time. I mean, it's not really necessarily about political bashing, but this is where it comes from. And they say, that people should stop building on floodplains or so close to riverbanks. And while there may be some of that, I mean, in my view, it's not that we live in an uninhabitable environment here in Trinidad. To me, it just seems like there should be a very simple engineering solution. But you all are the experts. You tell me. Let's start. Who wants to start off? Roger, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you. Right. Well, first to begin with, flooding really cannot be stopped altogether. What we can do definitely is to reduce the mitigation and the damage and negative effects of flooding. There are a number of measures that can be done to reduce that. Now, you did indicate that, is that really, but say, I don't want to get into the politics, but a lot could have been done in the past and was not done. A lot could be done presently and also for the future. There are various components that we could implement to reduce flooding throughout the country. It's not really rocket science, as you would see, but there need to be a leadership, there needs to be a trust, there needs to be ongoing works, basically. What we are doing currently over the last, I should say, for many years, we just keep doing maintenance, routine maintenance to existing water courses and drainage system. We really do work to improve the capacity of the infrastructure. Very rarely you would see a project where they're improving the infrastructure or improving the capacity of our drainage systems. And that is where some of the problems lie, the major problems lie. For instance, whenever it floods in the Port of Spain, you have flooding taking place downtown Port of Spain. That can be reduced significantly. We have three main rivers that run through Port of Spain. You have the Marvel River, you have the St. Anne's River, and you have the Debe River. Each of these rivers, studies was done in the past, more than 10, 15 years now, where retention ponds could have been constructed upstream to reduce the impact and reduce the energy of these waters cascading down the hills and the ranges that exist around Port of Spain. That's just one area, but throughout the country, it's not really expensive to implement retention ponds. It's not really expensive to improve the capacity of drains along our highways. We need to remove street flooding as much as possible, but the main water courses in Trinidad are very few. We have the Caroni River, a major water course that most of these streams on the northern range empties into, and we also know that high tide, low tide, it will depend, of course, on how much water can we exit from the area. So
even in, like, when you mention high tide and low tide, I don't think a lot of people understand that so much of Port of Spain is on reclaimed land, so it's at sea level. And then when there's high tide and rainfall, then the gravity doesn't work in terms of having the water go off, you know, but there has to be some sort of, I'm sure, some, like, you know, the Dutch and the Netherlands have been doing this for hundreds of years, and of course other people. You mentioned
the Dutch and the Netherlands, but a lot of the research that basically was done and utilized in Holland was done in Denmark by the Danish Hydraulic Institute, and their technology was used after Katrina in Louisiana. You might have recalled over the weekend the devastation of Ida, that hurricane. It was significant, but thank God for the works that it did after Katrina. The levees in particular held up. Even though it was a Category 4 hurricane, but the impact and the damage was minimum. Today on television, even yesterday, you'd have seen so many damages done. So you cannot really stop flood damage, you cannot stop hurricane damage. What you can do is institute measures to reduce the negative impact of these things. And there are lots of methods that can be used. Retention pond is one, but there are many others. For instance, there are cities right now, they call them sponge cities. Sponge cities meaning you have heavy intensity rainfall, instead of reducing the stormwater, it absorbs the water. So you can reduce paved areas, you can reduce a lot of areas where people normally want to have concrete and asphalt. You don't have to have that. You don't need that. You could have retention pond. You could retain your water and utilize those water for uses after. So flooding will be with us for a very long time, but you can reduce it, and it could be reduced significantly. But again, as I told you, there are many methods that can be utilized. A lot of ways that they can mitigate against the damage of flooding. But again, there needs to be leadership there. There needs to be a trust there. And I mentioned the St. Anne's River, the Debe River, and also the Marvel River. Studies have been done in the past. Millions of dollars have been spent on studies. But of course, no implementation to take place. So we can reduce flooding in Port of Spain very easily. We can reduce flooding in the Caroni Plains very easily. We have the capacity, we have the land capacity, we have the real estate. The real estate is not very expensive. Of course, people build on, in areas that contribute to the damage along the riverbanks. We have people still squatters and unapproved areas of the development taking place. All this can be stopped. Of course, regulations and enforcement, the regulation, even enforcement again, it's critical. We don't have that taking place really. People are allowed to build anywhere. You have to see a lot of the practices that exist in Trinidad. People dump stuff into the ravines and water courses. That contributes to flooding as well too. So a lot of things can be done. So I won't bash any particular government. for not, for causing flooding, but we need to address this in a scientific way. And it's not being done scientifically at all. It's a really, you have a big flood in Port of Spain, they clean some drains, at the end of it, you will hear nothing after that. And then the next flood, they'll talk over the same thing again. Same thing, Caroni, St. Helena, those areas will come in a state, even further down south as well, where they have natural flooding. You'll hear about it for a couple of weeks, and then after, nothing been done. They might clean a couple of drains, a couple of water courses, but that's, in my opinion, that's routine. That's not, you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to maintain, but to increase capacity and add some science to what you're doing to improve the infrastructure. That will not happen. We need to do that a lot more.
Right. Well, let me bring Dr. Sammy here. From being a chairman of a regional corporation that is so affected by it. I mean, you see the human cost, the human damage. You have to deal with the aftermath. And you've written so much about this you as well. Tell me your perspective about this. Why, what can be done? How hard is it? Why are we still facing these problems all the time?
Well, after listening to Roger, maybe I can leave now, because it seems to me he has covered a number of the points. Let me start by this issue of climate change. Now, as you know, over the past 3-4 years in particular, and it's very easy to identify, the showers are short bursts, but they're very intense. So what is happening is the built environment now does not have the capacity to retain that water, so it runs along the road and it floods places. Prior to this, let's say 40 years ago, you would have more natural environment, you would have more forests and so on. And therefore the water would find its own way over time and flood lands which were not occupied. And that was all right. By that, I mean, it didn't bother anybody in particular. But now, of course, because you now have so many settlements, people are bothered. For example, in Penal, we have 34 communities, Penal, Debe. 40 years ago, we did not have so many communities. Now, if I go back a bit, apart from climate change, therefore, everything we do now has to be mindful of that. It includes agriculture, it includes architecture. So when at local government level you approve a house plan, it now has to make allowance for things like water harvesting. And the same thing that Roger spoke about, a sponge type, you don't concrete everything. And you therefore gradually, you keep some water away from going into the water courses immediately. I did a 6-point plan, a simple 6-point plan, which I had proposed to government in November of 2018. And the first thing we need to do as a local government practitioner, I can tell you, is go back to the communities. And people say, that's old time. I'm saying, no, we need to rediscover going back to our people and reconnecting with our people. For example, in Trinidad, there are 524 communities identified by the CSO. Tobago has 69. If you have 529 communities, those people living in those communities care very much about water courses that are blocked. They care very much about trash that is not collected. They care very much about when people block water courses indiscriminately and so on. They care, but the collective voices are not heard. So I am saying each one of them starts by doing a mapping exercise. Now, you don't do it alone. You need some expertise. So you could involve UE, you could involve UTT, you could involve COSTAT, whoever it is. All the people can come together, design a questionnaire, put it into that area. So, for example, in Barataria, it's a built community. It's dense. You go into Port of Spain, areas of Port of Spain, it's built. So the community profile in Port of Spain will be totally different from a community profile in Moruga or in Penal or in any other part of Trinidad. The point I'm making is each environmental audit will be different, will identify the issue of water courses and so on. And then, very importantly, you digitize this data because you are working with the experts out of UE and UTT. When you do that, you create a base map. And all planning, in my view, thereafter, can take place. By that I mean, where do you locate settlements? Where do you put roads? Where do you put housing projects and so on? All of that then will have a proper base map. Now we have some of that in place already. A lot of work has been done by the public servants, tremendous a lot of work. And we have some excellent public servants, but I don't believe enough recognition is given to them and the kind of stuff they have generated. So that's the first point. The second point, then, they become the environmental police for you. They help you, for example, to revegetate your slopes. A lot of slopes have been denuded. It may be only grasses removed, but they have been removed. And it is now also contributing to this quick runoff and quick flooding that is taking place. The third is, I don't know if you recall, in 1987, John Humphrey proposed, he brought all the idle machinery capacity together. Roger may remember this. And what he did is he had a per unit agreement on how many cubic you will clear. This is the price we'll agree on. There was no public tendering. He had agreement. Now he lost his cabinet portfolio because of that subsequently. But what they did, they cleaned all the water courses in Trinidad and it didn't flood for 2 years. So if it could be done in 87 through the political will, and that is missing here, totally missing, involvement of community and involvement of idle capacity of all these hundreds of excavators, and the economy was similar in 87 to what it is now.
Yeah.
So it is not, you cannot use those people in a creative way. Agree on a payoff plan over a period of time, and people will accept that. The machines will be working, people will be employed, the water courses will be cleared. The next point is, and Roger made the point, detention ponds. I don't know what is it, why can't people understand the importance of detention ponds? I can take you places where in Switzerland we put 1 or 2, and they work beautifully. On the slopes, you can put catch pits, which you can vegetate to trap the flow or the velocity, the volume of water coming downhill. You can do that. So it will vary from place to place.
I mean, Trinis like to visit Miami all the time. And you see that all around, like Florida and Miami. You see all these little ponds all over the place. It seems like a similar type of thing. Is that the type of development?
It's even more than that. If you do it in a community, for example, you go into Bonsi Trace, and that's a community in Bonsi Trace, and that's a valley. And what you can do, you involve the community in it, because in the dry season, you would have tapped in the detention pond. You've detained a certain amount, leave about 10 feet capacity, and you would have trapped some water. You utilize that water for farmers, for one. But you can use it for boating and fishing and camping and hiking and all those kinds of things. You can charge a fee. The community earns an income, so it becomes community tourism. Mm-hmm. And it can be done. And they are cheap. They are cheap units abroad now. I've tapped into India's site the other day about where you can buy something to purify water. You use that very water to give people for drinking.
Yeah.
We have to supply in the dry season 612 houses in Penal, Debe with drinking water because they are not linked into the system. They're not linked in. And here we have all these valleys in the southern range, and we have not tapped into any one of them to detain water and to have that water utilized in the dry season. Very importantly, when you trap it in the rainy season, you do not flood it downstream. And that's the point I'm making. You don't flood downstream. Even if it is not water off the mountain and it's on the flat land, like the water that flows, all our water comes out of Princestown area, most of it. You trap it along that water course. It's in the middle course of the river. You therefore can put parallel ponds if you wish. A pond could be linear, a pond could be round, it could be a rectangle, and any geometric shape. And you trap the water on the way down to the sea, in our case, the Gulf of Paria. So that's the fourth. The fifth I'm proposing is this issue of enforcement. There are a lot of people who are coming and encroaching on the riverbanks, whether they are agricultural people or they are people who are building their homes or extending their businesses. They have to move on those people. Now I see the government is using an excuse that these are the people who are causing it. That's nonsense. The flooding is taking place even above them. So it is not only them, they are also contributors, but they are not the major contributors, at least not in Penal, Debe. And the final one is public education. You know, years ago, we had a campaign called Keep Charlie Away. Don't throw your stuff here, don't throw it there, and so on. And people now, you should see what they do where I live. I live in the bush. And people come and just dump their stuff because I'm living on a small plantation, if you are a small estate. They just dump it around the corner where nobody looking. And next thing you know, I have to bring in a backhoe to clean what people do. And it's right under the no dumping sign, by the way.
Right.
So what you have to do is therefore have public education. So it's really that 6-point plan. Quickly, you involve the community. They become guardians of the environment. They become protectors of the environment. Second, you revegetate. Thirdly, a comprehensive water cleaning program similar to 87. The next is the issue of detention ponds. You do that, then the other issue is legal. Move on, people. You need to move on, people. Because now people, they're doing anything and they get away with it. And the final is public education, starting, by the way, in what I call ADC. Yeah? You're starting with the 5-year-olds. Because old people had too hard and they wouldn't learn.
All right, well, thanks a lot. So, Dr. Furlonge, have they left anything for you to say?
I wanted to make a little contribution on that.
Great.
I know I'm a traffic and transport guy, but I've written actually in my 440 odd articles, I've written several on flooding and rainwater harvesting and so on. There is actually a relationship between traffic and water flow. In fact, it's called a fluid flow theory in traffic. And you see this thing, what you all talking about, ponds and detention ponds and so on. It's a bad word in our vocabulary. Just restriction is a bad word, right? We have to get over that. You mentioned Miami, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because in Miami, all those lakes that you identified, they are the prime property. The land around those lakes are prime property, and they are really detention pond. I'll give you an example. The runways in the Miami airport, they are undulating. They go up and down like that. The reason for that is simple. It is a flat area, so they want to get water. One of the things you cannot allow whatsoever is water on a runway. So you have to get it off quickly. So although you have a camber, the crossfall, you also have the vertical and up and down, so it comes off the runway at an angle very quickly. And on the side of the runway, you have these ponds where they detain the water for a period and get it off. It's the same thing, the same principle that works with park and ride. You always say about park and ride, park your car to a parking lot and you take the bus or the train and you go. That parking lot is a detention area. You detain the vehicles and you allow the people to go forward. So it's the same principle. I want to just start off in this one. The rivers, we have turned our backs to the rivers. The rivers used to have our front door. The St. Joseph River was when obviously the capital was St. Joseph, our capital. And our front door the people's front door used to face the river. Now the back door is there. And that's why you have the dumping and so on. I have had some of my students do recreational activity, the planning and feasibility of recreational activity on the Cunupia River, or what we know in the early days as the Madame Espanol, going right down to the Gulf of Paria in Central. So what can you do there? You can do, on the banks, you can do recreational activity. You can do walking, jogging, if you improve it. You can do flat bottom boating. I remember learning from people like Eva Easterman and so on. All you need is a foot of water draft for flat bottom boating. And if you have flat bottom boating, you can pass under the bridges of all the rivers. So you can have from where the river starts and you could go down, you can have recreation. What am I saying? If we are allowed to turn our eyes towards our river, you will have less dumping, you will have less unconcern, because it will be now looking at the water, and what happened? What you'll have tourists coming to see what we have here. It will be a form of recreation and activity for our own nationals, our locals, as well as foreigners coming to see what we are doing here. So once more, you bring the attraction back to our rivers. We used to have detention basins all the time, you know, as Alan correctly said, in the days of Caroni Limited, when you had all these cane fields, where do you think the water used to run? The water used to go into the cane fields, and nobody would be bothered because they wouldn't see it. They would see the cane. But the water would go into the cane fields until the time when the rivers can take them and they would come along. So we had detention basin, but we now have to make it practical. And then the experts, I'm no expert in it, but the experts could come and tell us where we can put those detention basins as part of development. How do we How do we treat the water? Because you simply can't just let the water go. Some of it you can use for drinking and so on. Then comes the area of rainwater harvesting. Why are we allowing all the water from our roofs to go straight out into the drain? If you go to any of the islands, that's mandatory for them to have underground drainage. You go to BVI, you go to Grenada, etc. Because they do not have enough rainfall. Of course, now the Caribbean Development Bank is into the planning of works by resilience and risk reduction, because the most active disasters they expect to have in future, and it's flooding. They expect all our cities in our islands along the coast, they expect to have flooding. So we have to prepare for resilience. That's the next part, I suppose, of your discussion today. I believe that, where we have alternative to road transportation. I don't know if you recall, Kirk, in 1985, Roger will certainly recall it. 1985, the Uriah Butler Highway was cut off completely for a few days. Roger? Yeah. For a few days, completely. One person died or two persons died in their vehicle. They got afraid and they locked up. The car stayed in the car while people got out in the water and so on, a foot of water, some parts on the highway, some parts higher. And she suffocated. She died from carbon monoxide poisoning. But people were stuck in the traffic and could not move on the Uriah Butler. It happened more than once, but the 1985 was the most disastrous. What alternative do you have for for transportation mobility if the highways are unable to be penetrated? Right? I'd leave that for further in the discussion. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Well, good. You know, you mentioned the BVI and whatnot. And so that actually takes us to the next question I'd like to ask you. Some fundamental questions again about engineering our environment for human habitability. I think that's what Roger was talking about when you're saying, we're just doing routine maintenance and not thinking about applying science to really engineer our environment. And you talked about the underground reservoirs, but I know, for instance, in Bermuda, the roofs of the houses are required to be constructed in a certain way because it collects the rainwater, and so people on the whole island are serviced by rainwater, and they've solved their water problems that way. I mean, when you look at our perennial water problems, I mean, I've seen this newspaper article from the Trinidad Guardian in 1957 saying that the government promises to end our water woes by 1960, right? I mean, and here we are, 61 years later, and we still have it. I mean, what would it take to solve the water problem in this country? How long would it take? And why haven't we done it as yet? I'll start off with you, Dr. Furlonge, first.
Well, we have a piece of this. So let me start this way. Again, starting off with transportation. You have a piece of the Solomon Jochoy Highway suddenly flooding all the time now. And always the opinion is that a cloud stopped there and up to the doorway of a bus. That's to tell you how high the water is. That's that lower area in Claxton Bay. So if we are able, that rainwater harvesting is not only for your rooftops. It can be from your highways. Now, if your highway, notice the term, it's called highway. In the early days when highways were being built, it was meant to be built above everything else. That's why it was called the highway, right? And if those are being flooded now, then we are losing our way. We need to come back and recognize that there are opportunities to transfer the water that runs off the roadway into particular channels and so on for reuse and multiple use, actually. So we need to find a way to create rainwater harvesting, not only from the roofs, but from the edges of the road. As you know, and Roger could confirm it, The road water, the main damage to our roads. They say that when you teach it at university, there are three items, three components to road damage: water, water, and water. The water that stays on the edge with the uncut grass, it stays on the edge of the road, and it damages the pavement structure, right? When a highway is flooded, chances are the subgrade and the subbase material are all damaged, right? So it will, we saw a few years ago what happened to Mayaro. The entire asphalt sheeting moved and went its own way. See? So you have to find a way to not only remove the water from the surface of the road, but from the sides of it as well, and channel it into, well, I told you about the airports and so on in Miami, where they have these detention basins, but they don't stay there. They are reused, and that reuse can provide, with treatment and so on, with water treatment, it can provide the type of potable water or gray water that we need for other purposes. I'll hand over to Roger at this point.
Yeah, Roger, you can take it from here.
Yeah, what Ray has indicated there is quite correct. We need to, obviously, to improve our infrastructure, road infrastructure, we need to remove water as fast as possible from the subgrade, from the surface, but at the same time, collect that water, as you know, you can do rainwater harvesting. But what also is very important, I think is very critical in Trinidad right now, is our supply infrastructure. Getting water into people's tap. That seems to be the major challenge over decades now, in my opinion. It's not that Trinidad don't have enough water. Trinidad has enough water, in my opinion. Obviously, from the experts that Dr. Sammy indicated, whether there is weather change taking place globally, and they have predicted less rainfall in the future. This is something that will impact on Trinidad a great deal. There are major droughts right now throughout the world taking place. Yes, and there are floods as well. So high intensity rain is one area that we have to plan for, but we also have to plan for droughts as well, less rainfall. So what we need to do, obviously, our infrastructure to supply water to the various households and the various industries in Trinidad will be addressed. I hope there's a new Minister of Public Utilities, and I'm following very closely. And he has indicated some very critical and very obvious things that he needs done. It will take some time though, because for what he has indicated and what we think are on the same lines, it will take probably about 10 years to get that in place and provide that necessary improvement to the supply infrastructure. Rain harvesting, yes, we have, as I indicated, there is enough water in this country to meet our present demand, but we also have to plan for the drought situation, and that will come very sooner than we think as well. That will occur. So all these measures that Dr. Sammy and Dr. Furlonge indicated, these are the components of a complete system that needs to be implemented as well. They are very critical components. There is not one solution that will solve all problems in this country, particularly water harvesting and water, people getting water in the taps throughout the country. Because recently, I think about a month ago, I did see the minister launch a water harvesting project in a rural area. I think the Blanchard Valley in that area. And from what he indicated, he'll be implementing more of such infrastructure like that for rainwater harvesting and also for solar energy as well. And if you get into power supplies that are sort of thing. So that is a critical area that I would like to mention to the end of our discussion that we'll have to address in the future in this country. This is our wastewater management, a new wastewater management system needs to be put in place as well as other components. But that is one of the critical things that technology and engineering that we have to do here as a matter of urgency.
Right. So Dr. Sammy, let me bring you in on this too. And, you know, I want to say that I'll bring in the politics here. I mean, you know, certainly during the People's Partnership Administration, the amount of water delivered to households was I can't remember the exact figure right now. I should have had it at hand, but I think it went up to, you know, 70, in the high 70%, you know, coming from a low percent. I don't know if it was in the 30s or 40s before. And you know, so you know, what was done there, and what are your insights into you know, solving our water supply problem?
Well, let me start by giving some concrete examples in Penal, Debe. Penal, Debe, as you know, it's only 90,000 people on 240 square kilometers, of which about 60% is either directly or indirectly affected by some form of flooding. it is not that the homes may necessarily be flooded, but they cannot access where they want to go simply because between there and that access point, it has some flood. So they can't go anywhere. 40% actually have homes within the Orput Drainage Basin. And there are about 20,000 structures in Penal, Debe. It could be commercial buildings, residential buildings, and so on. Can you imagine if every one of them are mandated in law to trap their rainwater, catch rainwater, as we used to say long time. Long time, everybody used to catch rainwater. Now people actually are not doing that, except if you are not serviced by water mains. We have a list of 612 houses that are not serviced by water mains, and during the dry season, we supply them with water on a fairly regular basis over a period of 3 or 4 months. But imagine these people know that to survive in the rainy season, they need to catch their water because we are not supplying any to them. So they catch their water. So it is not that people have not been schooled to catch their rainwater. They have done it historically, and it can be now mandated that everybody must catch the rainwater. That's the first point. Secondly, we have to do new engineering in houses to be able to trap this rainwater, as Roger himself had said about sponge services and so on, as even Ray has said. We need to put in more of those into the places. And the next point I'm making is, here we have this excess of rainwater. You have people drowning in floods, and yet you have a scarcity of water, even during the rainy season, in people's pipes. Now, why is that? And that really brings us back to the issue of trapping new water or trapping old water and utilize it for portability, for people to be able to drink. And I am saying it is not rocket science again to be able to do that. You do it in a manner in which you put these small ponds we talk about, you start to treat it. It may take 10 years, that's fine. But as long as people know that there is light at the end of the tunnel, they will buy into it. And this is where community involvement becomes important. They will also protect these valleys that you are putting the ponds, or even these flatlands, from people who may come and indiscriminately cut down or build on the banks or throw stuff into the watercourses. They will protect it. They become your policemen, because it is in their interest to be the policemen. So the architectural designs have to change. We therefore have to influence the kinds of permissions that are given now when a person submits a drawing to local government for approval to build. We say, listen, you need to alter the design to catch water underneath your house in tanks, because tanks seem to be cheap. So you put 5 1,000-gallon tanks or whatever in your yard, you catch it there at least, and then you control the runoff quickly. Now multiply that, the water you catch, by 20,000 structures, and you can see how much you have reduced that runoff immediately. The issue of tides, high tide and low tide, that's critical to Penal, Debe, as it is to any area on the coast, where when it is high tide, you're in trouble. In Trinidad, we can, and in Penal, Debe, we can tell you when it's high tide, you're dead, because we know what's going to happen. In Penal today, not Debe, Penal, it actually flooded on the roads. And it's flooding areas that do not normally flood, a point I think that Ray made. So I am saying it has to be that, but you multiply that by every one of the 14 municipal corporations. So I spoke of Penal, Debe, but you multiply that by 14, because there are 14 municipalities in Trinidad. And you can understand the impact that will have on the environment and the ability to retain water, to catch water, and to utilize water for all the purposes we spoke about. It could be in the dry season, or even in the rainy season, for community use, for you can charge a fee, the community benefits because you are charging and they maintain it and so on, for boating and hiking and camping and fishing. I like Ray's thing about boating. I didn't realize that had been proposed, but we can use that kind of thing for that kind of approach. We have some beautiful rivers in Penal, Debe, that we can utilize it using that approach. And I like Ganesh, Roger's point about water, linear parks along the banks. You can do all of that. All of that is beautification. All of that is community input, and all of that raises revenue for the community. So that comprehensive approach we are talking about has to be done. It can't be one in isolation of the other. But you need to clean the water courses. Let me end on this point on one example, where the Kuramata River, which comes off the southern range, has about 6 water courses that come and meet on the Penal Rock Road. About 6 of them. Rivers like the Congo River, the Kuramata River itself, the Kura River, and so on, the Kupi River, and so on. They all come and they, as they say in Trinidad, they jam up. They jam up right on the rock road. So rock road floods first. Now you can imagine you trapping all of that water before it reaches the rock road. What it does, it prevents the flooding. You have water to use in the dry season. You have water to use for crops, and people therefore live in comfort. We lose every year. We have at least 3 major floods in Penal, Debe. We lose millions of dollars in crops and millions of dollars in household losses because of all of this. And again, you multiply that by 14. They used to tell us up to last year or year before, well, who tell them to build in the lagoon? Now, I had pause in another program to say, well, who tell Port of Spain to build where they build? Or who tell Arima to build where all of them flooding now? So clearly, the lagoon is not the issue in itself. You need to look at the whole thing comprehensively.
Right, right. So now let's move on to another issue about roads and the potholes and the maintenance and even the road network. I mean, so how would you explain the fact, the state of our roads, and how bad they are? And we have the world's largest natural deposit of asphalt in the world. I saw an estimate from a museum in Liverpool saying it was 10 million tons. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but it's a lot for sure. And I mean, that's what they have on their information site. I mean, what's needed to turn this situation around? Again, to me, it seems like one of these situations where there must be a solution, and I don't know why it's not being implemented. Why don't we start with Roger with this one?
Okay. First to begin with, I know you raise a point of we have the natural lake asphalt in Trinidad and Labrie, and because of the quantity of natural asphalt there, our roads shouldn't be in the condition it is today. Now, that's raw asphalt, and the difference between the raw asphalt that's found in the lake and what we actually place on highways and roads. What we place on highways and roads is what we call asphaltic concrete. It's a mixture of the natural asphalt with aggregates under heat, and then that is applied on the highways and main roads. So it's a bit, so taking the raw asphalt from the lake and placing it on the road, it wouldn't happen like that. It has to be mixed with other aggregates and mixtures in a controlled environment for to have the structural strength for roads and highways. That is one area I want to clear. But however, there is an important point here that you have raised. The condition of our roads today shouldn't be what it is, from my opinion. As Director of Highways for more than 10 years and Chief Construction Highway in the Highways Division for over 11 years, it shouldn't be that condition. I remember very well when things were pretty bad, when oil was $9 a barrel, we had very little money for road maintenance, but we improvised. We had access to other materials like the oil sand, we had materials like aggregates, and we to combine those things together just to patch potholes. Patching potholes brings a lot of relief. Yes, it's always good to pave highways and have it smooth and will save millions of dollars in the long run, but you need to look at things in a different perspective now. If you don't have the funds to do major road maintenance, then you need to patch your roads, because you need to drive on rural roads, you need to drive on main roads and other secondary roads to get to the highway. And if you can't get to the highway, paving a highway over and over and over will bring the benefit that you want to. So that's one area. The other area of fact is that we have approximately about 3,000 kilometers of paved roads in this country and about 8,000 kilometers of unpaved roads or secondary roads. So it's not much compared to other developed countries. And it shouldn't be the condition it is today. I remember again in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, as a matter of fact, when there were potholes throughout the whole country, all our main roads, all our highways and secondary roads, rural roads. But we introduced a patching program that we also implemented the local government authorities involved in it, getting access to materials that we produce in the Ministry of Works and our own asphalt plant, getting access to their labor and their gangs and equipment. And we did make a significant impact. In fact, I remember we reached a point where we had passed almost 90% of the potholes throughout the complete road network of this country. And that is when we had no money. That's when money was scarce, just as it is now, but we had the will to get it done. So there is how technology exists right now to patch our potholes. We don't need no rocket science technology with all this fancy equipment to go on the highways to patch potholes. You can employ labor, just like we have CPEP doing the control and maintenance, grass maintenance along our roads and highways. Why can't you have a CPEP gun for patching potholes in rural areas, particularly rural areas and secondary roads? Not highways. Highways is a risky, and you need to get more, I should say, more qualified people to go on highways with better equipment. So the roads shouldn't be in the condition it is today. And if people make an excuse about no material, that's very poor excuse, in my opinion. You can improvise, you can get material. We have access to material in this country. Lake Asphalt, irrigate some quarries, involve the quarry owners. Quarries, they use roads to get to the quarry, and their roads are in bad condition as well. They would like to see their roads repaired as well. So I would say there's a lack of a will, in my opinion, for proper maintenance to the place. Yes, we have a poor maintenance strategy and culture in this country. We all know that. We find millions of dollars to build new capital projects, but very little money is allocated for maintenance. Why? Is there no respect for maintenance? There's no glory in maintenance. I know there's no cutting of ribbon in maintenance projects, but still, it's a critical component in keeping our infrastructure. If we don't maintain a car, it will shut down on the highway. If we don't maintain a plane, it will crash and kill everyone in the plane. So just as important, the highways need maintenance. And the respect for maintenance, in my opinion, in this country, is very poor, very, very poor. Lack of proper funding for just basic maintenance. But maintain not only roads, but for most infrastructure, you'll find maintenance very, very poor.
Right, very well. Let me invite you, Dr. Furlonge, to add.
I will start off by saying people will try to get away with what they can get away with. I remember, even before I was a graduate engineer, working the summer jobs on the highways, on the Uriah Butler Highway. I was assigned to the lab where they had a materials engineer. The consultant had a materials engineer, and they had all these technicians doing the tests on the Uriah Butler Highway. And those guys used to rough me up. They were technicians. I was a student, and they would say, this is what we do, this is what we do, that. And they were running that thing very, very stringent standards. They were robust in what they were doing. And I am saying, what has changed, right? I recall in 1991-92, the San Fernando, I'm giving an example here now, of the San Fernando bypass between Monrepo and Scott Street, for those of you who know South. The southbound carriageway. It did not exist up till that time. The San Fernando bypass in front of the police station, Navet and Pleasantville and so on, were a two-way road, single carriageway, two-way. And a fellow by the name of Leverson Budlal, Roger will know him well, he took on that assignment to build through the insistence of Dr. Charles, took on that assignment, and he was engineer in the Ministry of Work and built that carriageway in 91-92 with resources exclusively from the Ministry of Works. The equipment, the supervision, the operators, the labor, everything in-house. And used, at that time it was pretty new, the soil cement mixture for things like the subbase and so on to improve subgrade. And you know that highway has stood up from 92 to now. Roger, they're now getting some potholes by Navet. I went and looked at, just drove down, and I'm saying, but wow, no repaving of that carriageway. Since that time, it has stood up itself. What is happening on our roads today? Roger talked about the maintenance. In fact, there are two major things in the component, in what we call the transportation system components. There's people, there's vehicles, there's roads or routes, terminals, maintenance on one side, and information and control, right? Maintenance is a big problem here. We talked about the simple thing and not cutting the grass on the edge of a road, and the water stays on the edge of the road. Eventually, it will cause that road to get the edge right there to get a pothole. So it needs to be cut. There are standards. The first world countries have standards of maintenance. When to cut the grass, how low should the grass be, the drains, what the condition of the drain, the type of the alligator in, you know, the cracks in the road, what to do before those cracks turn into holes, when you put the surface coating on them and so on. Information and control, that's another big subject. I always tell people, if I were to drop you, this is a sidebar, if I were to drop you at the KFC roundabout in Port of Spain, formerly we used to call it the Cipriani roundabout, If I were to drop you there and tell you, find a taxi to go St. James, would you know how to find it? Dr. Mego, you know how to find it? There is no sign.
Exactly.
People who know, they will tell you, walk up the road,
always
walk up Pleasant
complain.
Street.
There's no signs to almost anything in Trinidad.
Anything, no street information. So that's the flip side of maintenance. Maintenance, information and control, these things are forgotten. So I started off my little contribution for this point. People will get away with what they can get away. But if there are standards and enforcement to ensure those very same contractors who are doing the work, they are good contractors, you know, but they need to be monitored. They need to be checked on. I used to, as a young technician, those technicians used to rough me up, I told you. They had me dropping up on the concrete, on the asphalt truck to check the temperature of the asphalt. Of course, they have technology, newer technology to deal with that today. But those were the quality standards that were required and adhered to. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that. You know, we've been going, it's very interesting, and we've kind of gone past an hour, but I do want to ask you the other questions I have. So the way we'll do it is I will ask sort of one person each of the questions, but when you're answering it, if you want to tack back on a question previously, feel free to do that, right? So let me go to Dr. Sammy here. And the question I have is, we're talking about all these things, and obviously it impacts on productivity. You talked about it yourself in the corporation. It touches on the economy and these sorts of things, and social life, and just the quality and standard of living. So I would ask you, just for an estimate, what do you think, what is the cost to Trinidad and Tobago, in monetary terms, the loss of GDP or productivity or development, and also in human terms, of having this bad infrastructure and this bad or poor environmental engineering. So Dr. Sammy, what would you say the costs are in monetary and human terms?
I will leave the monetary part to Ray and Roger. What I can tell you is this. For example, the allocation to Penal Debe this year for recurrent was $65 million, of which $1.2 million for maintenance of state roads and traces. Hear what I'm saying? Of the 65 million, 1.2 million were for maintenance of state roads and traces. You know what that means? It means that's the money you'll buy the materials with. And the materials are here in Trinidad. We have all of them here. We don't need to go anywhere else and import anything. But yet we cannot get the releases to buy the materials. We have started, would you believe we only started this last month, August, the beginning of August, to get the first set of releases to buy materials so we can patch potholes. So we're now going to start to patch potholes. And of course, because we have so many potholes, we can't patch all of them. But what it means, especially in social terms, in human terms, that people now avoid roads and put more pressure on other roads that are patched more than the others. It means, therefore, the deterioration has set into the point where it damages vehicles. It damages the ability of people to move from point A to point B in a timely manner. It affects businesses because people don't want to stop there because I have a big pothole, I can't park there because cars will pull onto me. It damages the people's ability to go into social events. And people don't understand this. What do people want? People want happiness. And how do you define happiness? They want good roads, they want good drains, they want to make sure it's crime-free, and they have water, and they have lights, and they have a job. That's happiness. They want to know they can go into a football field and play, or cricket or something, or they can go to a temple or a masjid or a church and worship without fear. And I am saying, if these places are riddled with potholes, you can't move effortlessly from one point to another. So people therefore now say, look, I ain't going there. I can't take on that road. Or I can't take on the traffic because of the condition of the road. Or I can't take on the traffic because of the flooding in one area, and therefore I cannot access through the normal area. I have to go, and you have a lot of people therefore congregating on the road at the same time. So the human impact is tremendous, and then I'm sure it could be measured. I'm sure it can be measured, because when you ask people, well, boy, why don't you come? They say, no, I can't take on that road. Or why don't you go and shop in that place? That's too far. You see how bad the road is? So the I haven't been able to quantify it. I don't know if my people have been able to quantify it, but it damages them. And there is a final one I want to talk about, the psychological damage. After a period of time, your people realize, look, you're going to flood again. Where's the use? The potholes, where's the use? And everybody's saying, where's the use? And there was an expression a long time, they just drop their hand. They give up. They lose the will to protest. And that is a dangerous sign, because then state could ride roughshod over them. Roger made the point, there is no will. I will go further. There is no political will. It could be done. He cited the case of 1987, 88, 89, where the resources were scarce. Oil was $9 a barrel. And yet we were able to patch. I remember those days. I was in San Fernando, the city at that time. I remember the example that Ray gave about the bypass. I happened to be there at that time also. So it's doable. We can do it, but there is no political will. Now, there is one more point I want to make about local government. Not one of the local government bodies has its full complement of staff. So now people have to double up. They're getting less money. There are more people now. There are more cars. There are more houses. But there are less people now administering the little bit of money you get. And therefore, everything is collapsing around us. The political will is missing. The ability to manage is missing. It is not that the public servants don't understand, because they know what to do, but the political will is absent.
Yeah, and for someone who was involved in the Susu Lands project, where that was total will, in terms of trying to figure out a way of matching the resources of idle land to the problem of people without land and without much capital. It was just creative working, and I think Roger was speaking about that before, that he was seeing, and this is so important, what we need to do to have this will and creative thinking to tackle these problems. Now, Roger and Ray, you can comment on that question, but because I want to get to all the questions, I will ask Ray. I think this would be your pet question, I think, which is, what type of road and transportation network, again, stepping back to think of like a big picture and a future orientation, right? So, what type of road and transportation network do you think would be ideal for Trinidad and Tobago to really open up and develop? Because I'll tell you, in my view, I think with proper physical development, I don't think we have proper physical development. We're basically living on the old slave plantations still, right? The old plantation and barrack yard have been, and the estates have been converted to residential zones. It was for an entirely different imperial purpose our country was built, rather than thinking about living for free people, right? But if we were to really have a proper transportation network and infrastructure network to open up our country, my guess is I think our population would be much greater too. I think we could take 2-3 million, maybe even more. But what type of let's say road and transportation network do you think should be there? Like we had the trains that were shut down, and the public transport. Roads, do we have too many cars, or is it we have too few roads? I always loved Mr. Pandey's answer when they asked him, about cars. And he said, listen, cars are freedom for people, especially poor people, to go about and take their children and family to work and lessons and engage in economic activities. So I'd just like to hear your take on this, because I'm sure you've given it a lot of thought.
You are raising a little sore point as you talk about cars there, because I was chairman of the transport policy in 96. Mm-hmm. When the document had the future, what we are facing today, that's 96, right? 25 years ago. And the problem that document is still there, you can go on the net and see it, we are facing today, predicted it because of that way of thinking. So my answer, some people may not like it, because you have asked me for something tangible. The tangibles are the easy part. The intangibles are the hard part. For example, next month we are going to have a budget speech. The minister is going to but budget allocations are not about spending more. They should be about spending better. But everybody is happy when they spend more. But So these are the strategic objectives we should adopt, right? It may not be answering your question tangibly as yet, and I know, but I'm giving you an approach to how to get where you want to go. First thing, we need to establish, and I've put it down in some notes here, establish institutional systems for transportation sector management, coordination, and regulation. So the institutional systems do not exist. Do you know we do not have any entity within the Ministry of Works and Transport for transportation planning? There's no entity. It does not exist. Good. 2, integrate transportation planning with land use and planning and management. So there is a link between, it's like the chicken and egg, land use planning and transportation, they are linked. And do you know, I use a rule of thumb equation. Sometimes the only equation I use when I'm talking to people. Land use planning minus transportation planning is equal to traffic management problems, right? So if you don't have a transportation planning unit, how can you get what I'm saying? 3, quickly. Develop and maintain an integrated, coordinated transportation infrastructure for efficient movement of passengers and freight. Now, I know that's where you're going, but you see, I mentioned that term freight. We have never collected data on freight or cargo. Now, how do you expect to plan a country that moves on any given highway? 15 to 20% of the traffic is truck.
Yep.
How can you not collect data on freight?
And in high traffic, peak traffic times, it makes no sense.
Makes no sense. 4, develop appropriate reform mechanisms to help budget your allocations. In other words, your budgeting must be justified, not some allocation for infrastructure, so much that's investment. And of course, that should be done with the private sector. I know we didn't have time, but I would have liked to have talked about the water taxi, coastal water taxi, and private operation and so on. But anyway, 5, incorporate environmental protection and resource conservation in the transportation activities. The environmental, right? I would like to see things like reclamation. Listen, Singapore is a quarter of our size with more than 4 times our population. So to answer your question, we can more than handle 3 and 4 million people here, but it has to be better organized. 6, ensure enforcement and compliance with laws and regulations. I told you earlier in my last talk that people want to get away with whatever they can get away. Regulation need to be enforced. Now, of course, we have some foolish regulations, right? Some of the regulation. Why do you have the merit points for parking ticket? Why? Why must I get the merit points for parking badly? You know, like that. We leave that there. Next, promote public awareness through the use of appropriate information to inculcate a positive attitude. Awareness of the people. We don't know. We don't have information. We jump on a bus. We don't know what time the bus, well, when we're waiting on a bus or public transport. And that's the next story where taxis are actually functioning as mass transport systems. That's why we have the congestion at the taxi stands, right? That's another discussion. The information is not there. The taxis are leaving and the maxis are leaving when they are filled. They're not leaving on a scheduled program because there is no incentive to operate. We build housing communities, and the first business that sets up in this housing community is a PH stand, a parlor and a PH, right? And lastly on this, improve safety and security. Listen, there's a big issue about gender equity where it concerns women and children, right? We're not talking about traffic safety. We're talking about safety, you know the term first mile and last mile. To get to where they're going to get the transport, the women are harassed. The Shogunas Makistan, you know where it is? It is in the middle of a drug den. Nobody could go there in the night, right? Is that comfortable? You know why nobody takes it on? It's ignored? Because the decision makers jump in their car.
That's right.
They don't think about the woman. I always use the example, pre-COVID, obviously. When the woman finishes at the casino at 9 o'clock in the night, and she lives Caparo or Tabaki, and the van from the casino at Grand Bazaar drops her under the flyover in Shogunas. How does she get to Caparo? She has to wait and hope, right? Where is the equity, the social equity involved in transportation provision? I'll stop there because there's a whole pile of things. I know time is of essence.
Yeah, well, I have to bring in Roger, the longest serving director of highways, on this question. So how can I miss you?
Okay, well, Ray basically touched on all the critical elements that would go into a modern transportation system that will affect the GDP and our economic output in this country. What can we do now? Because the institutions that Ray indicated, they don't exist. And of course, without a proper planning, without a proper national physical development plan for the country, how could you plan a highway network, a proper highway network to meet the demands of the future? So Ray touched basically on all the critical issues basically that any transportation planner will want to. But what I would like to hear Ray indicate is that we have an ongoing present day problem, right, with congestion in this country that is affecting our GDP, that affects man hours spent on properly productivity, basically producing. You want to spend your full day doing something productively. So what will we do, Ray, to help reduce congestion, to help reduce all the lost man hours on our roads and highways? It's something that I left on my desk up to haven't been implemented. It's a real-time management system, traffic management system that Ray have preached about. We have infrastructure in the ministry right now. We have our surveillance room that we have cameras set up in Port basically along this corridor up to Grand Bazaar, I believe. And it's underutilized, in my opinion, in terms of managing traffic. We see every day additional lanes and increased physical capacity of our road network taking place. But what we don't see is intelligent systems. We don't see things being done to improve or to increase the capacity of our network, to improve the capacity of our existing road infrastructure. And this is something really, he can talk about hours on this, but it's something I'd like him to mention as well. Enough attention is spent on that, and I would like to see less roads being paved and more intelligent system being utilized to improve the capacity, to improve improve whatever capacity we have right now, because there's talk that we don't have the funding to do this and the other, but we have the limited funding to improve capacity. It doesn't take much money to install cameras along a highway, to install signs. I remember when we had congestion and Endeavour flyover, Ray, you remember that? Mm-hmm. Congestion. We had congestion morning and evening. They didn't know what to do. But then of course money was a bit scarce at the time. But what we did, all I did really was spend $100,000 on new signs and new traffic regulations, and traffic began flowing again. You remember that, Ray?
Yeah. Information, yes. Information.
Using intelligent system, using data, because whatever you do must be data driven, must be engineering driven, and the institutions to provide that, we see a lack, and we see those institutions falling down. Credibility is also very important, and I won't touch on that right now, but Ray, I'm sure Ray can understand what I'm talking about when it comes to that, the information that we get nowadays to do our studies properly.
Yeah. I mean, and yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you're talking about, and Ray made this point too. I mean, you're talking about like people almost and traffic, and with the same principles, scientific principles as managing the water. Either you collect them and put them out somewhere, or you have ways of regulating them, and the flow and the movement, and we just lack all the scientific planning data for that, and that's really terrible. But for the last, I wanted to ask some quick questions, and I'll do each of you to answer these questions very, very quickly, right? Because of the time. But if I had to ask you to name one top engineering priority in Trinidad and Tobago, what would be the top one? If you could get something done, just one project done, what would be your top one? Let's start off with Dr. Sammy.
Well, actually mine is easy, and that's to fix the roads. Now, fixing the roads doesn't mean only our roads. There have been county roads that have been abandoned, oil field roads that have been abandoned, a lot of what we call orphan roads. So for example, only 43% of the roads in Penal Debe are vested in Penal Debe. All the others fall into that category, or they may fall under highways, but there are not many under highways. The others are really these orphan roads. And I'm saying, if you can enhance those roads, if you can improve those roads over time, then people will have another route to take, and therefore avoid the congestion on these on the roads which I use principally at this time. So my first engineering for Penal Debe would fix all the roads.
Like, so all the orphan roads.
All the orphan roads. Add them and then patch what you have.
Okay. And let me go to Ray. What would be your number one project.
Number one, yes, and it can happen. It can happen in the short term, because obviously there are short term, medium term, long term.
Yeah.
This one, it has always been my burden, the organization and administration of public transport. Now I need to explain this, because when I use the term public transport, people think of the PTSC. PTSC is simply a government-owned public transport operator. In fact, some people say it is a government-owned enterprise to employ people in the business of transport. You get the picture?
Yeah.
We have never had organization and management of transport, public transport, ever in this country. We have never had it. So the taxis do their own thing with very limited regulation, the maxis and so on. What we need to have is an organized transit authority or public transport authority that will organize public transportation, the private sector, the public sector. Government should pull back from operating and allow the private sector to develop the various routes, collect the relevant data, where people coming from, where they're going to, what's the purpose of going, recreation, work, etc. We just have 600,000 odd people in this entire country needing to travel per day. That's very easy to manage. We have never had it. The routes are there. There will be the organization, the data, put that together and call it public transport development and management. If we were to get that, and that could be easily done within the short term. That will be my pet project.
Okay, very interesting. And Roger, so what would be your number one pet project?
Well, what I would like to speak more on roads, but I think currently right now, what is really urgently needed in this country is a proper flood risk assessment to be done. It's affecting the lives of people too much for more than 5 months every year. Every year, as far as I can recall, people have to live in fear who live in the flat areas like Caroni and Kelly and St. Helena and El Carmen, those areas that are further down south that Dr. Sammy indicated. And if proper flood assessment management systems are done, we can plan and we can implement systems to reduce flooding in these communities and reduce the cost of flood, as Dr. Sammy indicated. And that to me would have been my pet project, urgent pet project. It could be done over a period of time, in short term, medium, and long term, but it is achievable in my opinion, and can be done locally with our engineers here and all like people like Dr. Sammy as well, who's on the ground every day. I mean, having to deal with flooding, and that will be my pet project, my urgent pet project, honestly. Yeah.
Right. Very good. Very good.
And it's very easy to be implemented because they did it in the UK based on catchment areas. They didn't need any one comprehensive plan. It was done in the UK quite successfully, and that model could be utilized in Trinidad.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and one other quick question, similar to that, is what do you think was the best engineering project ever done in Trinidad and Tobago, and why do you think it was the best? I think I could guess Dr. Sammy's answer because he kind of said it in 1987. Am I right?
Well, that yes, but that's from the flooding point of view only.
Right.
I think really, and again, I want to support Roger. If I was prioritizing, I didn't realize that we were also talking about flooding, and I agreed 100% with Roger. That is my priority too. The best to me is 60% of our people live along the East-West corridor, and the ability to move in any direction is critical. And what I think was very critical is where we were able to do the interchanges. Now you say the best engineering project.
Yeah.
And the ability to maintain the highways in the way it was done during Roger's time, because I'm aware of that, and even during Ray's time. And indeed, the highways were beautifully maintained during that period. Perhaps it would be good if you can put them back there and then put the political will there and then continue to improve that networking along the East-West corridor. Now, that I don't want to be parochial because I'm talking about an impact on 60% of the people, plus all the people from South who were not to work, which is half of South.
That's right.
So if you can help in that regard, I think that to me was the best historically.
Yeah. Then they won't have to spend 3 hours driving home or up to work every day, Yeah, exactly. So what about you, Dr. Furlonge? Sorry.
Okay, well, I'll start off by saying that is one of the questions I asked more than 60 of the who's who engineers in Trinidad over my, when I was president of the Engineers Association, APET. And most of these career of excellence awardees, most of them referred to the Point Lisas Industrial Estate.
Right, okay.
And I would say, I will tell you mine shortly, but I would like to say that I think the Point Lisas Estate, in my view, should have been considered a catalyst. Because yes, there were, all the branches of engineering were able to be applied there. They hired almost all, in those days, they were taking the graduates, had guaranteed jobs in the Point Lisa. So it really helped our professional engineers to grow and develop and so on. But I'm saying we should have considered it a catalyst so that today other engineering and other types of professions could have evolved from it. That did not happen. Classic example, the road to Point Lisas is still a 2-lane road, struggling to get into Point Lisas. Classic example. So they built Point Lisa, then build the road. So that's what I'm talking about. But what I would like to say, my thing is some incomplete project. The priority bus route was visionary when it was planned in 1974. It was the first theoretically exclusive busway in the world. United States did not even have a busway at that time. 1974. In fact, the great Gabriel Roth came to Trinidad in 96, well-known international transport economist, and asked me to take him. He came down to visit Trinidad and asked me to take him on the bus route. I thought he would say, well, you go Maracas or something. I said, why you want to go to the bus route? He said, your people have only written a paragraph about this phenomenon called the priority bus route. Exclusive, theoretically exclusive busway. What is the problem with it? We have never allowed, it was once the longest busway as well. It's no longer, but we have never allowed it. After planning it, it was completed around 1990. After planning it from 74, we have never to this day allowed it to work as an exclusive busway. Imagine that. Exclusive busway. If you go to Pittsburgh, there is one very similar to us, where you have the parking garages, the parking lots on the side of it. Same 2-lane like here. 2-lane, you drive on it, perfectly operating. Here, you get every man and his dog is allowed to use more than 1,200 vehicles additional to public transport vehicles using that, right? Everybody you read on the papers, when there's flood, take the bus route, open up the bus route. Hey, it's a busway. Park your car and use the bus. We have never allowed it. That's a phenomenon that we need to complete. The phenomenon called the exclusive busway, known as the priority bus route.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and it used to be a lot better than it is now. Because now it's just like another road. but let me go to Roger. For you, what do you think is the best engineering project that has ever been done in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, right to the words of the about the Point Lisa's development project was, in my opinion, the best engineering project ever in this country. It impacted most people's lives in terms of jobs, in economics of the country as well, basically downstream, all downstream companies as well. So, and the engineering behind it, the will behind it, I think Ray might remember the pioneer of that project, Ray?
Yes.
Professor Julian. I think he was the brain behind that project for that Point Lisa's development.
Lenny said, that was Lenny said.
Well, Lenny said, and I think Professor Julian. But again, that project impacted on basically all the lives of this country economically. Yes. And of course, it improved the infrastructure for upstream and downstream industries as well. And I would say if it was left to continue, it because there were other phases that were supposed to be implemented over the years, but for some reason the other things never get done. But it was, in my opinion, the best project, civil engineering project ever in this country.
All right. Well, thanks very much, everybody. We've gone over the expected time, but I have so much more I'd like to ask you. I mean, your years of experience, and also your intimate knowledge of the problems and solutions, I think are so important. But we really appreciate you coming on tonight and sharing your knowledge. So I want to thank you very much. Any last words you'd like to say before we sign off? Let me invite Roger, then Ray, then Dr. Sammy.
Well, I think we said a lot, and of course, if we had gotten more time, there's a lot more we could say of the present situation in the country. I would like to stress more on what could be done here presently, in light of the fact that we have changes taking place in the environment, as Dr. Sammy indicated, and we need to plan for that more. We're not seeing that sort of planning taking place. We just see it's more of a joke, ad hoc reaction to basically somebody the situation we're in. So I would like to see technology in this country be utilized much more. We have to accept the new technology in the implementation of the management of our road infrastructure, the management of flood mitigation systems, things like that. And we need to get our young, Ray more in touch with the university than me. We need to get our young students a lot more aware of what can be utilized in terms of to be more relevant, rather than to give an armchair approach. I'm sure you know these armchair experts will speak wholly on something that can never be implemented. As practitioners, Ray, myself, and Dr. Sammy, I think a lot of improvement could be done, and our young students today, engineering particularly, could be brought a little more closer to these type of solutions.
Okay, good. And Ray, any closing words?
Yeah, just two things. Our policies need to be framed towards reduction in vehicle kilometers of travel. That's one. All of our transportation policies need to be framed in that way. What is the total vehicle? That's an annual statistic collected in the developed world. It's collected annually. We don't have that. We don't collect it, but we can collect it and then know what we want it to come down to. And two, we need to prepare for electric mobility. Electric vehicles are going to hit the world by storm. Many countries will no longer in 5 years' time have internal combustion engines, diesel and so on will go out. And what will be the problem for Trinidad? We're going to get dumped Mercedes-Benz. People say again, a Mercedes boy, they're going to get internal combustion engines. Now, electric vehicles have reached SUVs, trucks, etc. We need to prepare for the world of electric vehicles because we are energy conscious and climate conscious.
All right. And Alan, any closing words?
Yes, certainly. Again, I want to piggyback on what is happening in Penal, Debe, but try to extrapolate for the rest of the country. We need to involve our young people in our planning. We have neglected the brain of the young people coming out of these institutions. We neglect them badly. And I want to add, the women, I have seen women made suggestions that a hard old back man like me say, but I never thought of that because we don't involve them. So involve the community, but ensure in involving the community, you piggyback on the brains of the people who have had the experience because they have lived it, but please the young people, and it has to be done at all levels. Involve the young people in the planning and the execution, and you'll be pleasantly surprised to see the kinds of things they'll come up with.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much. I appreciate it, all your insights and what you've shared, and I'm sure our readers will, and our viewers and listeners too. So that's it for our discussion today. This is really just scratching the surface. There's so much more that we need to do in this country, this is a great starting point for us to take off and to really create the type of civilization we need to create in this country. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Have a pleasant good evening.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Guys.
Okay.
Thank
bye.
you. Thank you.